Hi everyone, my name's Darryl Panes, CEO at As Good as Gold Australia, and today once again I'm joined by my brother Brian and partner at As Good as Gold. And today we have a very special returning guest, none other than the Chief Marketing Analyst at ITM Trading, way over there, I've got to say, this in Phoenix, Arizona, and boy would it be good to get back there again. And I refer, of course, to the incomparable Lynette Zhang. Good morning, Lynette.
Good morning.
Good morning,
Very
Lynette.
good to be back again. I'd love to visit you in Australia.
Yeah. Well, it's becoming more likely, I guess, now that some of the rules have relaxed.
Yeah, the borders are starting to crumble down, and we're allowing some people to come in and some people to go out.
Yeah, exactly. And our chief economist, John Adams, is one of those, and he'll be heading over to the US shortly for a major conference and is going to be listed as an international keynote speaker. So it's all starting to happen again, isn't it?
A little bit,
yeah.
That's good.
So somewhat positive signs. I want to start today, Lynette, if I could, with a story about President Charles de Gaulle, and there's a very definite reason for this. Charles de Gaulle stood up in 1965. He made a very famous speech. And it was all brought about by his lack of confidence, I guess, in the United States at the time, and in particular in their currency. And he stood up and said, I do not trust the American dollar, I only trust gold. At that, he sent a warship to the United States, and gold at that point of time was redeemable in US dollars. It was fully backed, $35 an ounce for gold. So President de Gaulle sent the warship to the United States, and France got their gold. However, there were a number of other countries that decided to follow suit, and it was quite clear that President Nixon recognized that he knew that overprinted to pay for the war in Vietnam. So wars have a lot to do, and this is one of the reasons I'm bringing it up too. Wars have a lot to do over the centuries, destroying currencies, and this is what President de Gaulle felt at the time. So President Nixon knew that he couldn't commit to all of these other countries. Very simply, they didn't have enough gold that overprinted. Yeah. So Nixon and Henry Kissinger then got together, and we ended up with the petrodollar. And petrodollar, of course, was a deal that was set up between Saudi Arabia and the United States and committed the rest of the world to pay for oil in US dollars. So that gave the United States considerable ascendancy with their currency, and ever since then, it's been the prominent currency, in fact, holds reserve currency status. So it's mainly been due to the belief, there are 2 points here, the belief that most people think there is still gold at Fort Knox, about 9,100 tonne. The last audit, I believe, was 1953, so it's questionable, but there is this common belief. And of course, the petrodollar. These were, which gave the American dollar so much ascendancy. My point here is, he who owns the gold rules. Now Russia is selling its largest exports for rubles or gold, and there is a very definite move away from the American dollar. So what we had in place, or America had in place, they are now losing. My question to you is, could this move by Russia establish a trend and be duplicated by typically China, Germany, Italy, who already have significant amounts of gold? You'll note that we didn't mention Australia there because we don't really have any, and what we do have, Lynette, is in London. But could this create a trend and lead to the demise of the US dollar and its reserve currency status?
100%.
Yeah.
And let me just say that when Nixon took us off the gold standard, they say close the gold window, but really the significance of that move was he put us on a debt-based standard and handed over control of inflation to private banks, the Federal Reserve.
Yep.
So by the time he did that, we actually had less gold in deep storage than we did prior to the confiscation in 1933. So if he hadn't done that, then presumably if there is still gold in Fort Knox, we would have had none. But no reserve currency lasts forever.
No.
And the US dollar, yes, I've been hearing so much more frequently now. I mean, look at a huge ally, Israel, has reduced their holdings in dollars and increased their holdings in yuan. And I think that when we played the card, which is not the first time we've played it, but cutting Russia out of the SWIFT system, which is the US payment system, you really, at the level that we did it, I think you only get to play that card one time. So the whole world saw that you either play by the rules that we want you to play by, or we will cut you out of the system. Because much as they, and I don't know if you get the same feedback in Australia as we get here in the US, but the way they make it seem like the whole world, except for maybe China, is against Russia when that's not really true.
Mm-hmm.
So what Russia did in anticipation of this, by reducing their dollar holdings, increasing their gold holdings, and fortunately, you know, you made a really good point that Australia's gold is held in London. But what Russia just showed everybody, which is something I've been saying forever, if you don't hold it, you don't own it.
Yeah.
And I don't care what your perception is. In a court of law, your perception means absolutely nothing. So yes, I 100% do, and I felt this for a long time, that, you know, we were losing our status as the world reserve currency because we abused that privilege so much. And you get enough countries that are not happy with how heavy-handed we are, which is where we are right now. Yes, we'll lose that status. Absolutely, 100%. It's actually been underway since, 2002? Because that was, well, before that when they created the euro. But in 2002 was the first time the Federal Reserve, at least on record, had to buy back some of our government debt. It was at low levels, and it was all hush-hush, though. You can go into the FRED, the Federal Reserve Education Department, and you can pull up their holdings in treasuries, and you'll see, I think it was December 13th of 2002, something like that. But nobody ever talked about it because that was what a third world country had to do when they couldn't get enough people to buy the debt. Now, all of a sudden, it became a great thing after the financial crisis, but was typically what a third world country would do, not the advanced economy and the world reserve currency. So yeah, it's been a long time in coming. You look at the SDR, you look at how they included the yuan and twisted the rules, changed the rules so that they could be included in that basket. Well, they can include all the currencies in that basket. But when they bring one in, guess what? Everybody that's in there loses some of the percentage of that basket. So yes, I absolutely agree.
So I mean, they've held it for a long time, since early 70s. What would be the ramifications globally for the United States and the rest of the world if they lost that reserve currency status?
Well, you know, we've already over time, there are fewer dollars being held overseas. And maybe we could just say that the reason why holding dollars is important is because as the world reserve currency, if you're going outside of the US borders to buy like the oil or medicine or lumber or anything, you had no alternative but to use dollars. And so
Sure.
everybody had to hold them so they could use them. But that really has been changing, and the percentage of dollars being used in the global marketplace has been declining actually pretty rapidly, or maybe not so rapidly yet, but over time that's been in decline. And we've actually kind of held that status since the Bretton Woods Accord in the 40s, where the world agreed to peg their currency to the dollar, and the US agreed to peg the currency to $35 an ounce of gold. We actually went to give that status back, but then we created the petrodollar, as you said, and the SDR, special drawing rights of the IMF, was actually created in '69 to take over for that status. So the way that it would impact, the US would be the most impacted, but the IMF at that time, and they've subsequently tested it to make sure and tweaked it, created what they call a substitution fund, where if you are anywhere in the world and you're holding US debt or any other asset, dollars, etc., you can deposit them into that substitution fund, and then the IMF converts them into SDR denominated assets. So in theory, they could then regulate the speed at which those dollars would come back to the US, potentially regulating the speed of inflation. But, it hasn't ever been done before. So this is all really just a theory, but that would presumably probably create a buffer for the rest of the world on their dollar denominated assets, because they would be able to convert them into SDR denominated assets. It would also, for the IMF, then take kind of an obscure kind of currency, the SDR, and give it massive amount of global positioning, right? Because all those dollar assets are now SDR assets. And I personally, I'm either going to be right or wrong, but I personally think that's going to be the world reserve currency. Just makes the most sense to me.
So which countries would be in the best position to take advantage of this right now?
Anybody other than, it would put Russia and China and India in a much better position, probably. Although Russia and India at this point are not part of the SDR. But what they've talked about and would make the most sense to me, it makes sense that they would include every currency in that basket. But North Korea would benefit as well, probably some of the Middle Eastern countries. But yeah, I think, maybe every country, because they would no longer be subject to the dictates of the Federal Reserve.
Yeah. Yes, it'd be a whole different world, wouldn't it?
It will be a whole different world. I'm just not quite sure if I'm happy with the SDR. In fact, I'm not. I would say I'm not happy with an SDR. I go back a little bit in history here, Lynette, and while Darryl was talking about the reserve currencies and gold and who owns gold and things like that, I've got a book at home which I've read a number of times, and it's really about the bankers, the central bankers that were involved in the First World War. So we're talking France, England, Germany, and later on America. But it was interesting, probably in the first 3 or 4 chapters of the book, you can tell that the First World War was supposed to be a very quick war, 3 months, maybe 6 months, a few skirmishes, and then it'll all be over. But what obviously happened that is the skirmishes came into a slightly bigger skirmishes, and of course it went for 4 to 4.5 years with millions of soldiers dying, and of course civilians as well. But what was interesting is that the three countries before America got involved, the three countries of Germany, France, and England all went off the gold. They went off the gold standard within 6 months because they were running out of the stuff. They could not fight the war with real money, so they had to go for play money, monopoly money. So that's fake money, and that's how all wars are not only finished but started, because you cannot have a serious war with gold because you absolutely run out very, very fast. Interesting. And the top again, just before finishing with that question with Darryl. I noticed that Russia, a month ago, their exchange rate to the US dollar was something like 84 rubles, right? And I had a look yesterday, and it was 71.5. So which means the ruble has strengthened quite substantially just in the last month. So, and of course, as Darryl said, it's backed by, ruble's not backed by gold, but they're dealing with gold and they're dealing with their own currency. So it just goes to show that I think we have overlooked what used to work for 5,000 years, and that is gold. That is your reserve currency of the world, not rubles, not anything else, not SDRs, but this stuff. Exactly. These products here, it's gold, it's the same. I always find it rather interesting. We talk about reserve currencies and the exchange rates to the US dollar. And yet, gold and silver is the same price all the way around the world. It doesn't matter where it gets dug out from. It could be dug out in China. It's not 1/7 the price of the yuan, right? It's the same price. It's a price of yellow metal and white metal out of the ground, and it's all the way around the world. So why on earth we continue to think that an exchange rate and having a reserve currency from one particular nation or a group of nations is the ideal way to go? Can't be.
Because that's wealth transfer. I mean, if you look at really what's been happening forever, I mean, not forever, but since, you talk about World War I. Well, prior to World War I, central bankers had a charter that was typically 15 to 20 years because governments absolutely knew that they would destroy the purchasing power value of the currencies. Yeah. And so they needed kind of a scapegoat, and they needed to go back on the gold standard because that was what would happen during the wars. Countries, including the U.S., would go off the gold standard to fund the war, go into hyperinflation, and then they would end up back on the gold standard because the population would lose all confidence. And that's the only reason. It's so brilliant. The whole strategy that they came up with of controlling the rate and speed of the inflation was just genius. And it wasn't until the Federal Reserve was installed in 1913, and World War I was, what year was that? 1914? Do you really think that was a coinky-dink?
Yeah.
Because I don't. And Ron Paul really said it best when he said it is no coincidence that the era of perpetual central banking and the era of perpetual war coincide.
Yeah. And
we've been in a perpetual state of war since 1989. And I did a study once, and I looked at, the wars and then the time difference between, so you had the hyperinflation and then the time difference between this war and the next war. And it was usually, don't hold me to this, but I think about 50 to 54 years. I'm talking about before World War I. And then people would get over it because there was enough time lag in between, and then they would forget. And so the same thing would happen again because they needed to fund the war. The Fed originally had a charter of 20 years. So let's see. 1913 plus 20 is 1933. I don't think that was a coincidence either. It was in 1927, for the first time in history, that they gave a central bank a perpetual charter. It was in 1928 when the industrialists and those that were playing in the stock market, well, by that point, the general public that now had access to credit for the first time, and they felt really wealthy, and they're watching the stock market go up, and they're like, I want to be like them. And, so it was interesting because I was off on my dates. Okay, 1927, the central bank was perpetual. 1928 was when the general public started to get involved in the stock market and the industrialists got out. And when it became predominantly populated, or the markets were the public, then it got too expensive and they, bam, cut off the credit. 1929, we had that crash, the global depression. It ended up being a global depression. And then they ended up justifying taking away the gold from the public. When Nixon did it, that's when he took away the ability to convert dollars into gold of the countries.
Yes. Yeah.
So it's just insidious, and I wish I could sit down with Ben Bernanke, who thinks he's such a 1920 scholar. I'd like to have a conversation with him. I have a very different opinion than he does.
Dear. Yeah, no, very, very true. I'd love to sit down with a couple of these so-called economists. I'd like to make a question here that we talk about individual freedoms and how we've lost so much of our freedom, not only in Australia, but in America, Canada, and, pretty well everywhere around the world. A couple of months ago, we saw in Canada that the truckers that were, I don't know if I got all my facts right here, but they were grouping together because they had a challenge with the government that said you cannot cross the border unless you are taken, let's say, double vaxxed. Let's just keep it at that. Right. So, as these groups of truckers merged to fight this ban, right, the Canadian Prime Minister made a statement and produced a law that he would, to stop the group of truckers from building up and up and up, he froze the bank accounts of those particular people, as well as any person that was donating to those truckers. Now, we got to remember, this is over probably a 2-week time span. They were not earning any money. They couldn't cross the border to supply their goods, and because they couldn't cross the border, they weren't getting paid. So how did they get paid? From donations. So people who donated, Darryl, had their accounts frozen. Now, I ask you, Lynette, number one, it's totally wrong. Number two, to be able to have your bank account frozen so you can't take any currency out of that bank account. It's not money, it's currency, right? Take out any currency, so you're in just about as position as the truckers were. Lynette, what are your real thoughts on this matter? Can it happen in other places?
Of course it can, but let me also expand on that, because it wasn't just the bank account, it was also crypto accounts, and it was also insurance accounts.
Wow.
So these people were completely cut off, and even though supposedly they are not, I just recently spoke to a Canadian who said that they are still, people have not gotten access to their accounts. They've made so many hoops, so they've really punished them. 100%, it can happen anywhere. And I point that out all the time. So I'm really glad, Brian, that you brought that up, because that's so critical for people to understand. If they had this, they could have converted it into any cash that they needed.
Yeah.
But if you have everything inside of the system and the system says, nope, what are you going to do?
Yeah. Yeah.
And even cash outside of the system is, even though it's losing purchasing power, at least you'd be able to go into store and buy stuff with it.
Yeah, exactly. You've got inflation that might reduce the value of it slightly, but that is much better than having no cash at all.
Right.
Yeah.
although I would like to point out that it isn't reducing value slightly anymore. It's reducing value rapidly. And I'm gonna, I've been putting my neck out on the limb with this, so I'll do it with you too. Why not? But I do believe that we are already at the beginning stages of the hyperinflation, because I don't think they can get this. They can't get under control. We're at the end. They have to raise rates to fight inflation, but they raise the rates to fight inflation. Well, what happens to all that debt that they encouraged?
Yep.
Right?
Yep. It keeps on building up. It just keeps on building up.
Until it implodes.
Yeah. I always underestimate or undertalk some of the mathematical numbers that I produce, and I agree here, Lynette, that inflation is supposedly has been 3.5% in Australia for the last couple of years, and they've just risen it to 5.1. In the United States, it's 8.5, I believe. But if you go to shadowstats.com and you use the figures that in the 1980s they used, which was included everything, you would be talking about 12%, 15% at the moment. And obviously how the figures are derived today, well, the politicians lie because they don't tell you. And you know, Lynette Zhang, that food and energy and real estate is not added into the inflation figures. Well, how can anybody live without food and energy? It surprises me how people haven't woken up to this. But, these are the facts that politicians are talking to us about.
I'd like to continue with inflation if I could for a moment. It's dominating the press worldwide at the moment. They have made so many mistakes, the people we trust. Look, we go from transitory inflation. This was ridiculous, and it was quite, honestly, Leonard, how does one react to that? Then they acknowledge that we do have real inflation and it's here to stay. And so recently, where we're getting new figures coming through all the time, of course, and the US inflation figures, this is really incredible. But they were stating them at 2.6% inflation figures last year. Now they're quoting 7.8, or that was last month. Now we're talking monthly. This reminds me a little bit of the Weimar Republic, and people having to be paid twice a day because the currency was losing value that quickly that they had to be paid that often just to make ends meet, like at the end of the week. But 2.6 to 7.8 and now 8.54. So in a month, we're seeing...
And that's official.
Yeah, that's official. Can you imagine what it really is? Right. And now in Australia, we go from 2% to 5.1% in the blink of an eyelid. So yesterday, the RBA here in Australia announced the first interest rates, and this is over 11 years. It's been 11 years since we've had an increase. So they increased the cash rate by 0.251% from 0.1. Yeah, wow. But so we're up to 0.35%, and everyone's now complaining, right? What are we going to do? How are we going to live? How are we going to make our mortgage instalments? So the line of thought is that we could be looking at an increase of 2 to 2.5% over the rest of the year. Yeah, once again, dropping stuff.
Maybe we'll do a 50 basis point move. Oh my God, that's just incredible. That won't make any difference. No, it's a joke. It's a joke.
But let's have a look at this. New home buyers with a $600,000 mortgage, and there's many of those out there, would be paying somewhere around $500-600 a month extra if, in fact, we went to a 2.6% increase. So we're looking at an increase monthly at the moment. Now, the plan, of course, is to curb inflation, right, and reduce the cost of living expenses, right? But
it's the plan, or maybe it's to keep people calm.
Yes. Good point. Yes. But the risk is a massive increase in mortgage defaults. Here, I'm not sure about the United States, but over here in Australia, we are heavily committed, and many countries around the world. Now, John Adams, our chief economist, Bill Holter, is saying 3 rate hikes about all it could stand, because we've done this before. And then we the RBA, Fed have to reverse their decision. John's saying 3 rate hikes, then the RBA would have to reverse the decision, because he said it will just crash the markets. It'll crash the real estate market. And of course, once that goes, who knows? But then he said we'll go to another bout of QE. They'll have to do that. They'll have to introduce another bout of QE, leading to ultimately, and you've already commented on it today, hyperinflation. So clearly banks around the world are between a rock and a hard place. They're damned if they do, they're damned if they don't. Where do they go from here, Lynette? What's the next step?
Well, if I had my druther, they'd go out the door, because I don't think we really need them. But that is the problem. And, you know, in theory, rates, they have to raise rates up higher than the level of inflation. Are they going to do that? That would be a no.
No.
And somehow, I love how they all say, but inflation's going to go down in the second half. They don't say how, with food, with the fertilizer, with the crop shortages. I mean, with everything that's going on, there is no way on God's green earth, but they have to do it to retain their credibility. But they're not going to be able to. 3 rates, I'd maybe agree with that. I mean, I watched them attempt it in this. Actually, any central bank that has made any attempt to raise interest rates since 2009 or 2008 has failed. It has failed abysmal. I mean, it's just abysmal. So where do they go from here? They're trying to keep their jobs. But hopefully people will lose enough confidence so that the guys that got us into this mess are not the same guys that stay in power on the other side of this mess. There is no fixing it. We have to go through hyperinflation because even what they have in mind for us, the CBDCs, I have not been able to find what would justify their creation other than more debt, which is what justifies the creation of the fiat money. So they have to get rid of all that debt. And the way that they typically do it, especially when you're an advanced economy, there's really not much choice in this, is they have to hyperinflate that debt away so that they pay it back with, in this country, well, in yours too, you have the Australian dollar, but dollars that have no value.
I mean, yeah.
They have to.
How can we have any confidence in these guys? I mean, we are talking about supposedly some of the smartest economists in the world making these decisions, and yet a blind man could see what we were heading into. I mean, I can't understand how they can get it so wrong. That's really my point.
You know, look at all the headlines. They were shocked by the level of inflation. They were shocked by the PMI. They were shocked by this and shocked by that and shocked by... They're shocked. They're surprised. This is unexpected. And they're the ones that are driving the bus?
Yeah, yeah. So where does that place us? I mean, a few months ago, the RBA here... Yes, I know. A few months ago, the RBA here in Australia said there would be no rate hikes until 2024. This is just a few months ago.
Yeah.
And now they're talking about multiple rate hikes in 2022. I mean, you've got to be kidding me. And these guys are the experts. So it's almost by design, isn't it? It's almost as if, you know, this is just a plan, and a poorly thought out plan, of course. But because you'd have to ask yourself the question, how could intelligent people get this so wrong? Your thoughts?
We, I think, as humans, always make the assumption that people think like we do. I don't think these are the most brilliant people. I think they are humans. I think that it's their job to keep us calm, the public calm and to instill confidence in the system that they know what they're doing. But that's the piece that they've gotten wrong. However, we're at the end of the cycle. I mean, there's virtually no purchasing power left inside of the currencies, whether it's the Australian dollar or the US dollar. There's virtually no purchasing power left in any of these currencies. That is by design, because they knew that not one man in a million understood inflation. So in that way, they could rob us and get us to agree to the robbery. And I'm talking about, what we get paid for our work. So I'm not convinced that they are the smartest guys at all. I think people need to realize that they are human beings. They have a job to do. Their main job is to keep us calm. So they might spend 5 minutes on policy and 8 hours on how they're going to deliver that to us. It's called perception management. But when you're at the very end with virtually no purchasing power left, so I don't know, how do you go below zero? They've been trying it. That hasn't worked either. And the tool that they've used, going back to the most ingenious, really, experiment in controlling the rate and speed of inflation, well, what tool do they have to do that? And that's interest rates. So they want to tighten monetary policy, which is what we're talking about right now. They raise interest rates, and presumably that slows down borrowing and spending. They want to stimulate the economy, get people to borrow and spend. They drop interest rates. But in this country, the average level that they would have, that they've dropped interest rates into a recession to get people to borrow and spend again, has been between 5.5% and 5.75%. So even if they do shock and awe, right? I mean, they still have no room to run, to stimulate. And every time that they do that, I'm waiting. But every time that they do QE, it takes more and more QE to get less and less results other than asset price inflation, like the real estate. Now, Wall Street has funded a lot of, the big corporate going in and buying this stuff so they can go in and pay cash. And what do they care how much it costs? So that drives up the price for everybody else. But then they turn around and take that and turn them into securities and sell them back to you, into pension plans and IRAs. So who's really taking the risk in here? It's the individual that's taking the risk. I mean, so who's left holding the bag? It's always the public. It's always the little guy.
Yeah, it's always the little guy that suffers the most. There's no doubt about that. I'm going to read out what you said. This is about 3 weeks ago. You did a video, and I was so impressed with the video, I had to bring it back up again. So recently you quoted, "A rise in the gold and silver price is an indication of a failing currency." We'll get back to that statement, which I want you to comment on. And I'm just going to give some examples here in Australia of how the rise of gold, or the price of gold, has increased. In fact, I always pick people up when they say the price of gold has increased. No, it hasn't increased. It's the value of the dollar that has gone down rather than the price of gold going up. But these are just typical things that have happened in the last 20 years. Between 2000 and 2022, so this year, the price of gold went from $400 to $2,600. So quite a nice rise, or certainly the rise of gold to compete with the amount of dollars being printed. In 1971, the price of gold was $35 an ounce, and in 1980 it reached $800. So you can see that these inflation areas have just making sure that gold keeps pace. In fact, it does better than keeping pace. I just want to give an example before we go back to the original question. Ford Motor Company, and people start to know as Good as Gold Australia and the Two Brothers and whatever, but we have done many seminars throughout Australia, and we talk about having a gold standard and why a gold standard works far better than any other monetary system that's ever been invented. And I have to give this example again if you haven't seen it, the people who are watching this channel. Henry Ford, and you know that gentleman, he started the ball rolling with the Model T Ford. In fact, the Model T Ford came out at approximately $800, but by the time he reached 100,000 units, he got it down to about $380 for a Model T Ford in 1908.
I think it was about $12,000 in 2008.
Yeah. Well, you know what I know. I did the exchange rate back then at $20 per ounce of gold in 1908. Anyway, the typical Model T Ford was around about 18 ounces of gold, right? So in priced in gold, your Model T Ford was 18 ounces, 380 or thereabouts, maybe a bit more. But now we move forward to right now, and in Australia, all of our automotive is gone, right? We had Ford Motor Company, we had General Motors, they're all gone, they're all disappeared, so that's great. We've done really well there. But their last Ford motor car was $40,000. But interesting enough, and by the way, 40,000 from 375 is over 10,000% increase in price over 110 years. But interesting enough, in gold, it went from 18 ounces down to 16 ounces of gold. It actually reduced in 110 years using a gold standard. The reduction of the motor car was down 16 ounces to 16 ounces of gold. It's about 11% decrease. So this is the power of gold and the power to use gold as the reserve currency of the world. Now let's get back to that statement, Lynette. A rise in the gold and silver price is an indication of a failing currency. Let's just elaborate a little bit on that, Lynette.
Well, I mean, you really said it quite well, to tell you the truth, Brian, because it is not gold going up in value. It's not the car going up in value. It's the dollars losing, or the fiat money losing value. So when you see gold goes up, you know, I mean, what do people pay attention to? They want to see things go up in terms of dollars, because that's that nominal confusion. So the price in terms of dollars, or in terms of whatever the fiat currency is, must be held down. Because if that goes up, and when that goes up, more people start to pay attention to it, because gold is good money. It's been good money for 6,000 years. It doesn't need a central bank to say it's money. It's got the broadest base of buyer because it's the most functional asset that there is. And it is the only asset that runs zero counterparty risk, no default risk. And there is no other financial asset that can say that. So do they want you to be holding physical gold and even physical silver in your possession? Heck no. Because then they can't rob you. And that's why, you know, price goes up, people pay attention. Uh-oh, we don't want them to pay. No, what do you want gold for? It never does anything. Yes, it does. It does quite a bit, actually.
Yeah. I love that expression, that rob you. In other words, people tax you. You know, that's the way the government robs you.
And the inflation tax, where they don't even have to go to legislation and make it visible that they're taxing you. That was a big reason why the government took us off the gold standard to begin with. Because if they want to tax you and you're on a gold standard, they're taking your gold and you know about it. And you might go, no. But if it's inflation that does it and they can keep it at that 2% level, they get what they want, but you just don't know, and therefore you volunteer it.
Yeah, it's an invisible tax system.
Exactly. Yeah. And corporations, works well for corporations too. Because when you read when they set up the system, corporations wanted to pay their employees less. But if you're used to making $20, you're not going to accept 10. But if they can give you $20 that spends like 10 because of inflation, well, their goods and services are what's inflating. And so the corporations, they've been making money hand over fist. I mean, at the highest levels. and look at this income inequality, right? 1971, the CEO average wage was 20 times what the average worker was. Today, it's something like 380. But if you look at a Jamie Dimon, it's something like 1,000 or 2,000.
Yeah.
Come on. This is really the system. Yes, it's robbery. It's absolute robbery.
But we have, from a politician's point of view, we have a great system that just needs twigging every now and again. But you're so right. You know, under a gold standard, they cannot take what they can't see. Yeah.
Yep. And you know, really what the gold standard actually did was require governments to be fiscally responsible. Oh my God, let us not be fiscally responsible. You're spending somebody else's money, you spend as much as you want.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, absolutely. You're back, Darryl.
Oh, yeah, I'm back. Did you miss me?
Yes.
No, I'll do it all myself next time. We don't need you, Darryl.
Okay.
Oh, no. We need
Well, that's the risk one takes. It really is. He's worked it out. He can do it on his own from now on.
Dear.
Look, it's becoming more and more imperative. Everything that we're talking about here leads to establishing a very strong point, and that is the one we all really need to invest in gold more than ever before. Lynette,
and quickly.
quickly, yeah. I mean, we've been
No more procrastinating. That's not going to serve
I know
you well.
you've got to start. You've got to start, because once you start, you then add to your position, because when you start to research. You engulf yourself in the subject. I know that's what you and I did. And now we've been investing in precious metals for like 30 years, and it just accumulates. And I've been asked the question many times, even by my son, who said, Dad, is there nothing else that you feel as though you should invest in? No, not really. Show me something that provides me with more security, a better return, and I'll gladly have a look at it. But I can't find anything. So I think that so many people underestimate the real value of gold. And I'll share this with you, as I have numerous people before, Lynette, but we talk about gold and we compare it to real estate, and a lot of people, when Brian and I speak to them about this and illustrate in this manner, they are staggered. They're shocked. How good is gold? Let's just draw a comparison at the moment between gold and real estate. Then I want your thoughts on this. Let's say somebody's got, and it could be any number, but let's say $500,000. They put $500,000 into gold and they let it sit there for 5 years. If one looks at the last 21 years, gold has averaged well over 20%. You could buy it in Aussie dollars, you could buy it for $400 an ounce in 2000, and now you're paying 2,500. So it's about 650%. Over 21 years, it's over 30% average over that time frame. So let's say you've got the $500,000, now you've got $1 million because you let it sit there for 5 years at an appreciation rate of 20% per annum average. You've got $1 million. You could now liquidate. You set up for retirement. You could liquidate at 20% per annum, and you'd have more money, you'd have more value in your account. You have less gold, but you'd have more value. The gold would be worth more at the end of each year than it was in the previous year, because it's appreciating faster than you're liquidating. Now, I don't know about most people, but I would have thought $200,000 a year in today's dollar terms would be a pretty fair retirement. Okay?
I like
Not
it.
anymore.
Right.
Yeah.
So, and people say to me, what happens if there's hyperinflation? Well, if there's hyperinflation, you'll be liquidating at a greater rate because it might be that you're taking out $300,000 a year, $400,000 a year, $500,000 a year, and that's fine too. But if you compare that to real estate, you got a $500,000 property. Let's say you got lucky, very lucky, and over 5 years, your property appreciated at the rate average 20% per annum. Now, I don't know if that's ever been the case in global history, but let's say it did happen. So you'd have a property worth $1 million. Now you've got to generate an income from it. So if you rented out that property, return would be about $40,000 a year before outgoings. Then, and if you took that into consideration, looking at about $30,000 a year. So we're comparing $30,000 a year with $200,000 a year. Gold has simply outperformed real estate to an enormous degree. No one, unless they fully understand gold, which is about 2% of the world's population, maybe understand what I've just said. But that's what Brian and myself have been building on and working towards for the last 30 years. So it goes without saying, we'll have a comfortable retirement.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You'll have a very comfortable retirement.
Yes.
Now,
Your thoughts, Lynette?
Well, first of all, I definitely do agree with that, but my strategy is a little bit different regarding real estate. And my father was a developer, so I definitely did grow up in that area, but fortunately my uncle was also into gold and rare collectibles, which is also very, very important because where they're common, they're all tangible. Where they separate, though, is you cannot take a piece of property and put it on your back and move it. And so the government consider this immovable property, and when they need to generate income, they can tax it more and more and more and more.
Yep.
And you can have the house paid off in full, but if you can't pay those property taxes, you lose that house. I can take this little piece of gold, stick it in my pocket, and go anywhere in the world with it. And so it enables me to take a small, tiny, movable store of wealth with me. And as you pointed out earlier, have the same level of purchasing power no matter where I go on earth. Having said that, I have done numerous studies on what happens to real estate during the transitions that we're in. And in like Weimar, Germany, 25 ounces of gold or the equivalent would buy you an entire city block, buildings and all. So that you use a little bit of the gold to convert into that income producing real estate, but you get to hold the bulk of it. And when we go into hyperinflation, what we see is that the gold value goes up even more, because I've done these studies, it goes up even more rapidly because now from suppression, it's going to its true fundamental value. And that happens much more rapidly even than the price of goods and services. So you actually need less and less gold as we go into hyperinflation to sustain and even, dare I say it, expand your income producing assets to get into the right position, an easy, comfortable position on the other side of this mess. Because as you pointed out earlier too, with all of the mortgages, do you think that these prices can just keep going to the sky? Like in California, I was just reading an article this morning. In California, people are paying $1 million above ask price for real estate. $1 million above ask. I don't know. Insanity can happen for a lot longer than you would think, but not forever. Not forever. So this severely overvalued asset now, and a big part of that is because it's been turned into a security, right? Real estate, I think it wasn't it in 2000 and, I'd have to look this up, so don't hold me to it, but I believe it was like 2000 and I want to say 16 or 18, where real estate actually got its own sector on the stock exchange. So they've actually, it's not just a house, right? It's not now just a place to live, but all of a sudden it became an investment, right? That could be traded and, treated as a short-term thing. So, yeah, I think this whole bubble is going to pop. And I think what's going to happen, I could be wrong because I can't control this, but I'm 100% certain of this, that you've got this overvalued real estate and this undervalued gold, and this is going to flip-flop. So what might take you, 100 ounces of gold to buy this property today might only take you a quarter of an ounce as we're in hyperinflation.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. Good solid point.
Remarkable. It's there's few stories around that, true stories around that I heard from in the Depression that office buildings were being paid for by an ounce of gold or half an ounce of gold, but because of the inflation.
Exactly. Yep. I did a whole study on that not that long ago. When did I do that? 3 months ago-ish, something like that. And it was really interesting to go into the different countries. And it wasn't so easy to gather the data that I would have liked to gather, but I was able to do it in a number of different countries. It was quite interesting to see. And that opportunity, I'm 100% certain, will be presenting again soon.
Yeah. Needless to say, I think the opportunities are for the people who hold gold and silver. And I love this video that I saw you in 3 weeks ago, because I think you got a little emotional because you could see the hurt coming, in the future, and because of the people that aren't prepared, and that's where the hurt will come from. But the ones who are protected with gold and silver will always be fine.
Yes.
I mean, I've had so many people say, well, if they don't do it, then that's just too bad for them. And honestly, that's not the way I feel. Because what we're asking people to do is have a paradigm shift. And that means they have to admit that the lies that they have believed their whole entire life, they have to admit that they've been lied to. And that's really hard for most people.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah, we will definitely be in a position, you've got to be in a position where you can help somebody who needs, it's a little bit like being on an aircraft, and you're all told to put your masks on. You might have a young child sitting next to you. Don't put the mask on the young child first. Put the mask on your face so that you're then in a position to be able to assist them. And that's what I believe is going to happen when it comes to gold. It'll provide you with that opportunity.
Yep.
Lynette? Look, I was going
Inflation.
to say, the big difference between gold, currency, we've talked about it tonight anyway, is with currency you can print it with reckless abandon. I mean, it started really with back in 1971 when they took America off the gold standard. That's when it really started to go crazy, and they've never stopped. And Brian, and I think Lynette also, could show how easy it is to produce currency, comparing it to having to... There you go.
They just keep
Play
on...
central bank.
Yeah, exactly.
They just keep on printing.
How easy is that? I mean, you've got to be kidding me. And until it litters the gutters, but has in reality no value at all, comparing it to the production of gold or even silver. I mean, it's got to go through a whole series of processes. The mine, there's enormous machinery, equipment, there's refineries. To produce a gold coin, to produce a silver coin, is a considerable effort. And we just saw how much, and by the way, their firepower.
Way bigger than those guns.
Yeah, exactly.
And I might also point out that this is used in one place, the financial system, as a tool of barter. Gold, silver is used in manufacturing, it's used in medicine, it's used in the financial system, it's used in jewelry, it's used in food, it's used in every single sector. I don't know why nobody ever talks about that, but when you're inside of a crisis, what do you want? You want something that only has one buyer and that buyer decides, nah, I don't want it. Okay, you have no buyers. You just have this and it's worth this,
Yeah.
right? But now you have something where you have full demand. Sometimes more, sometimes less, depending upon the economy, but there is always 100% of the time demand. And
Yeah.
from the broadest base of buyer, that's what I want into a crisis. That's why it's a true safe haven asset. That's why global central banks are accumulating it as quickly as they can, because they know we're very close to the end. Very close.
Lynette, thank you once again for your incredible contribution. It's always appreciated, and we're already looking forward to the next time
Absolutely.
we interview.
We have a lot of fun with it. But in all seriousness,
Come up with some new toys.
yeah.
But look, ITM Trading, Lynette, could you tell us just quickly a little bit about ITM Trading, and if any of our viewing audience would like to make contact with you, what would they do?
Well, ITM Trading is, similar to you guys in that we're just deal in the physical metals itself.
Yeah.
We like
Fantastic.
to help our clients with strategies, like we were talking about with the real estate strategy, for example. So we like to really know what people are trying to accomplish, because as you know, there's different kinds of gold and different kinds of silver. And so where you can use it for anything. I can tell you, I've used the back of my shoe to hang a picture, but really when I want to hang a picture, a hammer really it just gets the job done better. So to get a hold of us, we have the YouTube channel. We're ITM Trading. You can put that in, or you can put my name in, Lynette Zhang, and we have the website as well. So it's easy to get a hold of us. Text, emails. We love personal conversations. But, and we're here in America, you're in Australia, so that makes it a good relationship.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, fantastic. Okay, Jim Sinclair got it right, didn't he? He gets a lot of things right. Mm-hmm. But he talked about becoming your own central bank.
Yes, absolutely.
Isn't it interesting? Governments don't want us to have gold because it gives you power and it gives you influence, control, which is exactly what central banks have. It's okay for them, but not for us. So you've got to learn from that very, very quickly. Just do what they do. Become your own central bank. Peter Daniels, our lifetime mentor, many years ago, said, "I do not care what poorly executed economic decisions are made in the world tonight. Tomorrow, I'll still be able to party." I fully understand what he's talking about. I wasn't quite sure then, but I certainly know now. And, those who own gold place themselves in the same position as Peter, because that's really what he was talking about. And of course, Egon von Greyerz, a great friend, wonderful personality, and a very learned gentleman. Brian remembers his quote when he's asked the question, "How much should I invest in precious metals?" What does he say, Brian?
The exact answer is whatever you can't afford to lose. And so that is, when people start to think about how much I put in and whatever, it's a lifetime put in. It never stops. It's whatever you can't afford to lose.
Yeah. Lynette, thank you so much. It's been a privilege. It always is. We thank you again for your wonderful support. To our viewers and our subscribers, once again, thank you so much for supporting this channel. And so until next time, stay well, stay focused, and goodbye for now.
And goodbye for now.